Hello, friends. My name is Professor Dr. Debarati Halder, and I am founder of Gender and Internet Cyber Law Magazine for Women, and I'm also a faculty of law. Therefore, in today's session, I will be holding this session specifically for making all of you understand about research methodology and ethics of publishing research papers for social science research. Let's begin. First of all, this question comes in our mind as, does social science need research at all? Answer is yes. First reason is to evaluate the social situation. All of us know that human beings live in a society, and the root for such society is social contract theory, which means every society may have certain unique social situations. This may include certain criminal behaviors, certain intolerance related behaviors of the society. This may also include certain questions related to economic recession, inflation. This may also include certain questions related to gender equality, etc. etc. Research can show the way to understand why such problems arise. Keeping this in mind, we must note that we are not living in a utopian society. Therefore, societies shall be having certain kinds of social situations, and research will be making these problems clear for all of us. Research also helps to bring out a possible solution to address such challenges to the social situations. Research also helps to provide for a possible policy guidelines for achieving sustainability goals. Why? Because if any stakeholder is doing a research to analyze certain social situations, to analyze certain problems of the society, and with an aim to bring out a possible solution, research can also predict certain kinds of situations that may occur after 5, 10, or even 100 years. Researchers can also showcase, researchers can also provide certain kinds of policy guidelines if these are adhered to. Maybe the situations that may be arising from different kinds of social problems may be addressed. Now, let us understand, where does social science research differ from other streams? Remember one thing, in social science researches, the society is our lab, and in case of science subject researches or science stream researches, laboratory based researches can be done. That means a science, or for example, a biology researcher, a physics or chemistry researcher, they can use the laboratory to experiment certain things, to know the cause and the consequences of specific phenomena. For us, the social scientists, we have to consider the society as a lab. Saying this, you may understand one of the methodology, say for example ethnographic methodology, that can very well be applied for social science researchers. How a research or a research plan or a research project may proceed, we need to understand about a very clear roadmap. So, a research roadmap can be starting from the point when the researcher identifies the problem. every researcher may have different problem identification, and such problem identification must be unique, indigenous for every researcher. After the researcher has identified the problem, comes the question or the stage for literature review. Many times we do get to see that the researchers have done their research, and they have done their research because they have found out some lacuna in previous researches. Because of this, the present research becomes phenomenal or becomes significant. But it does not mean that the researcher gets to see that many researchers have done research on the specific subject that has been chosen by the researcher as the problem for the research. It should not demotivate or depress the researcher. The researcher must try to find out what is unique in his research, what is the research gap in the literature of other researchers. This basically gives the way for the researcher to understand the problem in a better way. Next comes the stage of constructing a solid hypothesis. Hypothesis is basically a statement, assumption, or presumption that throws light for the researcher to come to a conclusion. Hypothesis must be tested as positive or negative. Hypothesis can be considered as the brain of the research, as the eyes of the research that will be guiding the researcher towards a solid end. The researcher must also then decide about a methodology. Once the hypothesis is thought about and the literature review is completed, it becomes pretty easy for any researcher to decide what kind of methodology may be taken over by the researcher. And then it is best for the researcher to create aim for the research. Obviously, for several researchers, this may differ. Say, for example, some researchers may start their research with certain kinds of aims in their mind. Some researchers may go ahead for deciding a hypothesis, a methodology, before they can construct a solid hypothesis. But generally, it is seen that this roadmap is the common roadmap that are taken up by successful researchers. The last one in this slide is finding out a suitable journal. Once once the aim for the research is created, every researcher must have this in his mind, that his research must be read, that his research must also be taken as a literature, and that his research must be taken as something whereby the other people, other persons might think that yes, this research can be considered. However, whenever any researcher decides to go for publication, there are few mistakes that the researcher may do. These mistakes may be a life-threatening mistake for a researcher within his research life. Because if such mistakes are not avoided, the researcher may not only become blacklisted, but the researcher's career may not be shaping as the researcher may have dreamt about. So, what are these mistakes? Number one, thinking of quick publication. No research, especially in social science, must be finished before 6 months' time. As I have mentioned, we social science researchers actually do research on social situations, social problems, and We have to understand about such social problems. We have to analyze the social situations, etc., to come to a concrete conclusion. Therefore, no research must be completed within minimum time. That means one researcher must give maximum 1 year, minimum 6 months time for his research. The other mistake that many researchers make is to go ahead with shallow literature review. It is advisable that the researcher does the literature review not from Wikipedia but from certain pages, certain web pages like, for example, Google Scholar, and thereafter from good journals, indexed journals, university journals, books that are available online as well as in the library, published by good publishing houses. Next comes the question of research structure. Most of the time, the editors may reject the research paper because the research structure may look like something like graduation essays, undergraduate essays, or school essays. This must be avoided. Next, we also do get to see researchers, if they go ahead for such kinds of researches with such kinds of mistakes, might be blocking the path for future research, especially for himself. And what is very, very important is citation. Many researchers, that researcher may be coming from undergraduation level or from post graduation level or even from PhD level, may not know how to go ahead for citation. They may not even know that citation is a very important part of research. Thereby, what such researchers must do is, while going for literature review, they must pick up certain literature which will be useful for their research, and they must include such citations in their research. There can be many kinds of research, but the researcher must also be aware about the cost of the research. So there can be different kinds of research, as I stated. Say, for example, there can be funded research whereby the researcher might be getting some fund from some sponsors, etc. And this can be considered as a funded research. For social science also, such kinds of funded researches are possible and the fundings are available. Next is independent research, where the entire research is being funded by the author himself. In such cases, the independent researchers may have a broader perspective of going ahead for research and coming to a conclusion, workable solution, or definition, etc., which will be claimed solely by the researcher himself or herself, and it may not be claimed by the sponsors or by the funders. And next we get to see institution affiliated research, where the research is being done because the institution is supporting such research or the institution is commissioning such research. So next thing that the researcher must be concerned about is cost of publication. If you go for high indexed research journals, publication might be free of cost, but it is very challenging. But if you go for fee-based publication, the researcher must be aware about the cost of publication. That means it must be pocket friendly, but saying this, I must also warn the researchers that do not go for pay and publication researches, because it might not be good for your career, as well as the research might not yield good result. The researcher must also be knowing about article processing charge, because some journals may ask for article processing charge or APC. However, if you go for high indexed journals and if one researcher gets to see that the journal is asking for research submission, but there is no submission fee or article processing charge, etc., the research journal, I'm sorry, the journal may be asking for open access charge, which means the researcher can submit the papers free of cost. The papers can go through the reviews free of cost. The paper can be published free of cost, but the entire paper will not be showcased by the journal until and unless open access charge is being paid by the researcher. However, if it is not being charged from the researcher, that means the researcher is not paying any open access charge, it does not mean that the entire research will not be read by anybody else. The journal may be subscribed by universities, institutions, organizers, or by individuals. Such stakeholders and the individuals can definitely read the paper. Now comes a very important part of this session, that is about research publication, research methodology, etc. How to find out journal reservoir. Many persons have asked me, show us some good journals which are free. Now here comes some of the journal reservoirs which I have found out by my own research. These are definitely for my own research, but today I'm sharing it to everybody. If you go for this link, that is https://mjl.clarivet.com.home, you will be taken to some journal reservoirs. Further, you'll also be getting to see there are some journal reservoirs for Web of Science or for Scopus or for Cambridge.org.core or even for oxford.org.core, etc. These are basically called as Cambridge core journals or Oxford core journals. And again, when you go for this clarivet.com, you will be taken to a different page where you might be getting to see Web of Science listed journals. Now we all know that Web of Science listed journal publications are also accepted as a very high status publications. There are Scopus listed journals are also there, and they can also be found from the internet. Further, there are many other links which can be found and where the researcher can also submit their papers. For example, springer.com, Bologna Law Review, then TNDF online.com, that is for the like Taylor and Francis, etc. Then journals.sagepub, etc., which are run by Sage Publication. Again, Taylor and Francis.com, Action, Journal Information, etc. If you go ahead for such links, you might also be given certain kinds of author services. You might also be given certain kinds of author guidelines, etc., whereby following these guidelines, one can easily publish in such journals. I will be giving these links in the description box also. Now comes again the next stage for research paper publication. This is not something which the researcher, writer, author, etc. will be dealing with, but now this will enter into the editor's desk, and from there I will show you that how it passes through the reviewers. First, the researcher can submit their research proposal through submission portal. So here the researcher needs to see whether it is matching with the scope of the journal or not. So checking of scope and standard by the editor is the primary thing that the researcher needs to be concerned about at this stage. Once the editor gives a green signal, that means the editor uses his own discretionary power to accept the journal, he may pass on to the reviewers. So the first and the second reviewer basically goes ahead for giving certain opinion, etc., based on the merit, language, and the arguments that are made by the researcher in the research paper. So this goes to the reviewer number 1 as well as to the reviewer number 2. Then comes the question of critical assessment. After these reviewers have given their opinion, it can go ahead for critical assessment, which may result in the rejection of the paper if the paper does not match with the expectation of the reviewer and also with the expectation of the journal. Then we also do get to see the paper may not be rejected, but the paper may be accepted with major changes. That means the editor will return back the paper to the author stating that these are the suggestions, these are the criticisms that have been made by the reviewer number 1 and reviewer number 2, and your acceptance to the journal of this research paper will be conditional only when you carry forward these changes. Sometimes it may be seen that even if the researcher has tried to carry forward these changes, these may not pass through reviewer number 3. Therefore, the editor will be rejecting the paper even if the first communication would have gone that it is accepted with major changes. That means the researcher has to review the research paper majorly, and then again he or she needs to go through the same review process. And there is the second part of it. Sometimes we also do get to see if the researcher is lucky enough, if the researcher has done really good job, it might be accepted with minor changes. That means you can actually think that your research may be 60% accepted, 40% still depends upon whether you will be carrying forward the changes that have been suggested by the reviewers. And if such kinds of changes are carried forward, your research paper may be accepted. Next comes the question, when should a researcher consider for new submission? For example, a researcher has submitted a research paper to any journal, and the researcher has not received any information, or the researcher has received some information but these are not positive. In such cases, the researcher needs to wait for minimum 15 days if he or she does not get any message from the journal portal regarding the acceptance of the research proposal or regarding the acceptance to the portal of that particular journal. Further, if the researcher does not hear from the editor after 3 months of submission of this research paper, the researcher may consider that the journal has not accepted the research paper. And finally, if the researcher gets a rejection mail, then definitely it is open for the researcher to take that particular research paper as something which has been rejected by this journal, and the researcher can take up the comments, review comments, criticisms, etc., to revise that paper and to go ahead for next completely new submission. However, many researchers, including myself, we may feel extremely depressed if the research paper is rejected, because sometimes we do very hard work but it may be rejected because the reviewer may never had heard about your research problem. The reviewers and the editors may not be happy with the language because we are not a native English speaking community. Sometimes the reviewer or the editor or only the reviewers may not be happy with the research methods that are being followed by the researchers. These are some of the reasons why the research papers may be rejected. So here, the researcher must look at the criticisms very positively and constructively, and may go ahead for revising the research paper on the basis of the criticisms that have been received by the research paper. There are always points for improvement, and that must be considered by the researcher. It is advisable that the paper may be renamed after it has been completely rejected by the earlier journal, so that when the paper goes to some other journal, it is not confused to be the same old rejected research paper, because the reviewers may be common for many journals. There can be also some possibilities of improving that research paper through comparative analysis, and the researchers should not miss such points. Also, the researcher can go ahead for finding of another suitable journal portal for publishing of his or her research. Next comes the question, how to find out whether the journal that we are looking for are indexed or is indexed or not. Now, as you can get to see in this slide, say for example, this slide is about another journal called Justice Quarterly. Now here, if you get to see uh, in the slide, or if you see in the picture, I have basically circled certain points. Go to submission page, and again this side you are getting to see there are 7 issues per year. Therefore, it is actually taking the papers on a rolling basis. Just down this, you actually have to go to about the journal page. There itself, you will be getting to see the indexing of the journal, or for example, journal metrics, etc. So here you are getting to see Justice Quarterly is indexed in many indexes, etc. As for example, it is indexed by Sage Public Administration abstract, Sage Urban Studies abstracts, Social Planning Policy and Development abstracts, Social Science, Citation Index, Scopus, Sociological abstracts, Undercover and Violence and Abuse abstracts, etc. And by this, you will be getting to see whether this journal is indexed in Scopus or in Web of Science, etc. Thank you for listening to this session. I hope this will be helpful for all of you. If you have any query, etc., do let me know by putting your comments in the comment box. Thank you.